Welcome, everybody. My name is Amanda Barton. I'm a senior associate with Mr. Cannabis Law. Recently joined the team, so big shout out to my new boss, Dustin Robinson. Thank you for letting me join your amazing team. Very excited to be part of something amazing. We have a great event for you tonight. Before we get started, I just want to give some brief announcements. Cannabis Lab has some additional upcoming events. Next Thursday, on the 15th, we have a event dealing with risk management and insurance. It's going to be headed up by S2S Insurance, who is a sponsor of Cannabis Lab. Both Eric and David Ron have been working hard to put a great panel for you together for you guys next week. So tune into that. Additionally, on April 20th, a few weeks from now, we are going to have a networking mixer at Rhythm and Vine. It'll be from 7 p.m. till close. The MMTCs will be there and will be able to speak about their various organizations and the products that they have to offer. So we highly recommend that you come out to that in-person event. It will be outside. We are being COVID friendly as far as like with all the COVID precautions. So please bring your mask, please keep your distance, but we are looking to finally get back in person. We have some great sponsors this evening who are participating. So first, to our host sponsor this evening, Duree and Company. Duree Ross is the president of Duree and Company. Duree and Company is a press relations and marketing firm. They have been around for Duree's been doing this since she's been 19 years old, so she has a lot of experience under her belt. Once the cannabis industry really started getting up and coming, she saw the opportunity, so she started taking on some cannabis and hemp clients, has really made her name in the space as becoming kind of a preeminent expert. As you will see from her leading the discussion tonight, she not only is versed in PR, but is also well-versed in the laws and regulations surrounding the cannabis and hemp industries. She's very well-versed, and we're very lucky to have her, so thank you, Duree. And also a shout out to Mr. Cannabis Law and ACS Laboratories, who are also sponsors of Cannabis Lab. Both Masha Bellinson from ACS Laboratory and Dustin Robinson from Mr. Cannabis Law will be speaking tonight. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for participating. And Duree, from here, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and I am really honored to have put together this incredible panel. So thank you so much to C-Lab. I always enjoy the events when we have them and the programming that you put together. So as I mentioned, I'm honored to have friends and clients with us today, tonight, wherever you're at. It may still be this afternoon. So I guess we'll just jump in. So the topic that we're talking about today is the USDA's the final rule on the hemp regulations. They went into effect on March 22nd. We're very lucky to have Ricardo Alvarez from FDAX on with us. I know he's pulling double duty right now, participating. He'll be on in just a few minutes. So Ricardo, don't worry about jumping in right this second, but we are very, very lucky to have him with us. As Amanda mentioned, we have Dustin Robinson, Mr. Cannabis Law with us, Masha Bellinson from ACS Laboratory, Jason Navarrete from Pure Craft CBD, and I mentioned Ricardo. So we're going to just jump right in. But one thing I wanted to point out is in putting this panel together, we wanted to have folks that could talk from all different aspects. And so we're going to talk about the ruling, but we're also going to talk about the very, very hot topic of DELTA8, which I know is a personal favorite of Masha's. So she's going to be speaking quite a bit on this, and we have lots of questions for Dustin and Jason and even Ricardo. So let's get going on this, and we can just see how it goes. If anybody has any, please put them in the Q&A box, and we will either try to read them on Zoom or answer them in the box. So the Q&A box down at the bottom of your Zoom page here. So, okay. So we all know that the ruling went into effect March 22nd, where it was the final ruling on hemp. We've been waiting a really long time for this. And in short, it provides a few key takeaways. And they include requirements for maintaining records about the land where the hemp is produced, criteria for testing the levels of the total DELTA8, the disposal of non-compliant plants, licensing hemp producers, and ensuring compliance under the new program. So we're going to talk about how these different components kind of impact the many facets of the industry, and our key panelists here will be able to weigh in accordingly. So the first question I have is, I'd like to take a pulse from the panel. And I don't know if Ricardo can jump in or not. If not, don't worry about it. We'll get him in a few minutes. But do you all feel concerned about the particular aspects of this ruling, or do you feel that the industry has had plenty of time to prepare and make arrangements? I mean, I personally feel like it's been a long time coming based on how long it took. But what part of this does anybody have any feeling on kind of what part of the industry has been affected the most, and like what are your initial thoughts on the ruling? I don't know, Masha, do you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Duree. So I'm with ACS Laboratory, and one of the things that we did in the beginning, this was last year, we launched a hemp clipping program. So the hemp, we were told that as a lab, we had to send out a representative to clip, to take the clippings. So the farmers were not able to clip them themselves and then send them to us. So in essence, it's like a whole new division. So we had to, within really just like a month or two, just create a whole new division, because it has to be couriered. They can't, like, the plant is very fragile. You can't just it can't be exposed to heat or long periods of time. So it's put in a refrigerated box and it's sent. My point there is that we get to meet the growers. So, and I go on some of the hemp clippings myself, because I like to take pictures and just like hang out with the plants. And I think in the beginning, everybody they just didn't know. And people were, whether they were overcautious or not cautious enough, there was just a lot of confusion and panic. And so I think the most significant thing about this is there's a sigh of relief that there is a knowing, and that before, the most stressful part was that agents, so the farmers would call us and they would say, okay, we're getting ready to harvest. And so we had to send someone out there 15 days before harvest to get the clipping, take it back to the laboratory. Then it takes us 3 to 5 business days to turn around the potency result, which goes to the state. So you can imagine that period of not knowing it, many of them being their first grow. There are surprises, and surprises are bound to happen, and it was happening. And I felt like I was like, oh my God, I feel like a psychiatrist, like we were talking, like literally like talking people off the ledge, and many times. And so it's gotten so much better, because I think this extending it to 30 days to the anticipated harvest really gives hemp growers an opportunity to test a little more frequently and early. So if they're testing their plant early and they see that the levels are a little higher than what they anticipate, then they would harvest early, and there would be more CBG in the plant, but it just wouldn't be in danger of being hot. So I think that's a very positive aspect. And I think everything else, can be worked through with just time and preparation.
Sure. Well, thank you for that insight. We know that it's been pretty crazy, and everybody kind of associated has had to talk people off the ledge, like you said, and a variety of other things that maybe aren't in our day-to-day job profile. But I think we've all kind of had to get through that. So thank you for that perspective from the the lab side. Dustin, what are some of the legal consequences of this particular ruling? I'm interested in, before, during, and after. I mean, obviously it hasn't been that long, but I'm curious kind of your pulse on where things are at now with this final ruling.
Yeah, so obviously, when the 2018 Farm Bill came out, everyone was kind of interpreting how it would be implemented. And then you had the USDA interim rule, which kind of was where the industry kind of got up in arms and super excited about a lot of different things, and excited in a bad way, where they basically dropped the sampling time frame to 15 days. And they kind of had certain provisions in there related to what you need to do with hot product. And then the final rules came out, and there definitely were some concessions on what they said in the interim rules. So for example, that 15-day sampling period was increased to 30 days. And some of the rules relating to what to do with hot product were definitely eased a bit in that you're allowed to remediate that product, and you're also able to destroy it on site through some normal agricultural processes. So I think in many ways the final hemp rule was kind of not as big of news as maybe the interim rule was, because that's when people got a little bit upset. And really, I think it's a good example of the industry coming together after those interim rules came out and really expressing where the interim rules got it wrong, and then the USDA actually listening and actually making some changes in those final rules so that the industry could hopefully progress in a good way. But really the main thing around hemp is, how to not let it go hot and what to do if it does go hot. So from them increasing the negligent rule from 0.5 to 1%, to letting people remediate it, to taking samples earlier on, I think the industry was able to breathe a sigh of relief to some extent. But certainly I will tell you, here in Florida, the hemp farmers are still struggling tremendously to get good quality product while not actually going hot. So I think the 2018 Farm Bill was everyone cheering. The interim rule was everyone being pretty upset. And then the final rule was everyone basically breathing a sigh of relief.
Well, that sounds like we're maybe definitely moving in the right direction, I would say. So it's been interesting. I've gone through that whole kind of aspect from before the Farm Bill, even just on our side. And given that we do PR, crisis, marketing and all of that, we're oftentimes dealing with that as well too, with the clients panicking or something having, happened, and there may be a situation to address. So I feel like it's definitely been a roller coaster. I think that's what we're all feeling. And, and hopefully it just gets better from here on out. So thanks for that perspective, Dustin. Wanted to ask Jason, Jay, as he goes by. So Jay, you're the retailer, right? So how is the ruling kind of affecting manufacturers and retailers? I don't know if you've seen anything yet, but I'm curious from your perspective as a retailer, kind of what that perspective is. What are you seeing or feeling at this point?
I think it's going to take a little bit of time for it to, roll out and actually make an effect. As of right now, it hasn't made, too much of an effect right now, but I think it's going to start happening. But I think it's made it a lot easier. It's made it a lot easier. You have a lot of guys that are coming in from growing, original crops that you can grow true to seed from, which is, corn, stuff like those things. And they're turning into hemp farms. And those guys are expecting just to plant a seed and getting the same exact result. And cannabis or hemp is not like that. You're not going to get the same result from, every single seed. So I think it's going to start going to, innovation as far as just like the cannabis space is. And that's what makes the cannabis space so valuable, is that every single seed is different and everything is different, and that's where you hold your true power in this industry, because you can have one strain that's different from another strain, but it hasn't affected retail yet. So, but I do think it's going to it needs to transverse over to finding genetics that are just to that farm. And then of course, obviously that is your gold. You don't switch that over, give that to anybody else. You do the hard work, you find that, and you find the strains that test at the limits they need to test at, and they have the high CBD and CBGs and, all that stuff. You continue to crossbreed until you get those things. And then, you hold that true and dear, and you continue to crossbreed more and make it better. But that guarantees you that you're going to have a successful farm every single year. Every single year, you're going to have the same results, the same everything, because you're actually just replicating those genetics by clone or by tissue culture. And it just voids out a lot of mystery. A lot of what ifs, because you've already done all the hard work before you go ahead and plant, 2,000 acres, 3,000 acres. You've already done your testing. So, but yeah, as of right now, the retail is not affected. The manufacturing hasn't been affected yet. It's just still too early.
Well, thanks for that perspective. And I should point out that you're based in California, which I know is definitely, you have a lot of years in this space and have been involved, from is very different in California than certainly from Florida. I feel like we're much newer, we're much younger. And so it's good to hear that perspective, both from you as a retailer and also being an 18-year veteran in the space here, and that perspective. So it's always interesting to see, to see that perspective. So I see Ricardo has joined us, so I'm going to shoot this question right on time. So that's perfect. Thank you, Ricardo. And so, as I mentioned earlier, he's from FDAX, which is the Department of Ag for in Florida. And just wanted to really turn it over to Ricardo a little bit to share. Can you talk about the changes a little bit? Can you give us any sort of insight from your perspective as the folks in charge?
Yeah, thank you, and good evening, everyone. By and large, I mean, our rules basically stay the same, basically 95% of it, I guess, if you want to say it like that. We do have 3 major changes, mostly more significant for cultivation than anything else. And it has to do a lot with the sampling window period. So originally, or currently we have it at 15 days. So with the new rules, we'll be augmenting that to 30 days, which will allow farmers to sample 30 days prior to harvesting. Also, they'll be allowed to, they'll be allowed to sample from a greater part of the plant, which was, something that definitely was in high demand last time. Other changes that are relevant, is that, the USDA will allow to extend enforcement flexibility, on labs that are non-DEA registered. As a result, we'll continue to allow for variance with labs here in the state of Florida. So, we understand it'll take time, and there's a moratorium on it till next year, till January of 2022. Other changes were really minor, but nothing really significant. Something that's good to take into consideration for farmers, especially since we're finalizing with our rules and everything, is, as farmers proceed to whether or not they want to retail their product directly to the market or wholesale the product directly to the market, that will require them to get that food safety permit as well, whether it's for retail or for wholesale. A lot of farmers just simply sell and that's it. They sell their biomass and that's that. But some are getting very, very inventive, which is amazing. I've had some great conversations with hemp farmers out there, and they're coming up with amazing ideas as to create value-added products with their hemp, and very, very creative stuff. But that will definitely require them to make sure that they have that food safety permit. Other than that, I mean, everything continues as has been going. So far so good. We're pretty impressed with the numbers, and we're happy with how it's rolling out so far.
Great, thank you. So there are 2 questions here that came in the Q&A that I think are great for us to read right now. I see a bunch regarding DELTA8, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. But Robin is asking, do the new USDA hemp regulations preempt state hemp regulations already in place? Or must the hemp growers now follow both the USDA regs and their state hemp regs? I'm thinking either Ricardo or Dustin. Can you weigh in on that question?
Yeah, we have to. We will be adopting our hemp rules to the final USDA rules. But yeah, for right now, what is state rule is that's what farmers should be following for the moment.
Okay, great. Dustin, does that cover anything else to add there? There may not be, but.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that people understand that federal law does trump state law, and, our state program is required to be consistent with the USDA rules. So, like Ricardo noted, FDAX is working on making sure that our rules are consistent with USDA final rules.
Great. One other question from Rafael Alvarez. He's asking, can we grow Oregon genetics in Florida?
So yeah, I mean, so basically there's a lot of, confusion about certified seed, and I'm sure Ricardo gets a lot of questions about this. I do as well. Really, it's you need to have either a OSCA certified seed, or you need to have pilot program seed. really, I don't have any clients doing ayahuasca certified seed. I'm not sure if there's really anything out there that's worth spending time figuring out. So really, most of the seed that you're going to be growing should be coming from the pilot program. And so it's kind of created this weird situation where the companies that have these pilot licenses are kind of becoming the gate to people being allowed to get into the industry and grow certain genetics. So to the extent those organ genetics are grown at a pilot program and pilot approved, then yes, you can. But otherwise, no, you're not allowed to just take any genetics. And I don't, I know FDAC is trying to work their way through how to manage all that. But right now it's really just a testing period here in Florida. And so we have different genetics that have been approved at pilot programs, and those are really the genetics that people should be growing.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that is that what grows well in Oregon might not necessarily grow well here in Florida. So I mean, they're definitely two different kinds of ecosystems, and that's an important thing to understand, because and it's the benefit of having the pilot programs and how they're testing genetics at a local level. And so hopefully, that's really what we want to promote, is localized genetics that work for here in the state of Florida.
Great. Does anybody else on the panel have anything to add on this particular part of the programming before we move on to DELTA8? Anything else to add, Masha or Jay? I think are we good to move on, Masha?
So I have one thing to add, which is, so the margin of error, because the way that it's listed could be a little confusing. So it's saying that hemp farmers have a wider margin of error as being 1%, but that's 1% of 0.3%. So if it's testing hot, it could be like it's 1% of 0.3%, which is like 0.003. Does that make sense? So it's not that it's a very small. It's not that much more for them. So that's just important to understand that. Basically, 0.3 is the number. Yeah.
Okay, great. Ricardo, anything else to add? Or are we good on the hemp rules? I do see a question here.
No, we're good.
Somebody's asking about the genetics and separating cultivated versus industrial hemp. Not seeing exactly all that it's asking. I don't know if there's anything that Ricardo or Dustin would want to speak on cultivated versus industrial hemp. I'm not sure exactly what they're asking, but was there anything to add? Okay, we good? Okay,
No,
so it looks
I don't know
like
what that means.
yeah. Okay.
I think what he's asking.
I mean,
if
it's between like CBD or fiber.
Yeah, I don't think
Go ahead,
there's,
Dustin.
they don't make any distinction in the laws. So either way, you need to be growing either ayahuasca certified seed or pilot program seed. So whether you're growing for CBD or for industrial hemp, for grain, fiber, whatever it is, it needs to come essentially from a pilot program.
Yeah, and of course, keeping to federal mandate of total, DELTA8 THC of 0.3.
I have a question. How many pilot programs are there at this point? I know I've heard a lot of different ones trying to get started. How many are we at this point? I know I've heard of a lot of possibles. Do we know?
There's 3 official ones. Yeah, FAMU, UF, FIU just recently started theirs. Anybody else? Am I missing anybody?
Yeah, but I mean, each of those pilot programs though have also contracted with private.
Different.
Yeah, they've done partnerships. Yeah. There are many more, properties that are growing. It's not just those universities. Previously, it was just UF growing at UF, and then some of those universities decided to partner up with some of the private companies. So you do have several private companies that have pilot program licenses who are, once again, those private companies in many ways are kind of the gatekeepers now, which I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense, but that's kind of what it's becoming.
Well, thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to DELTA8. And for those that don't know, I've put a couple of sentences together for the background. I think most people know, but just in case. So DELTA8 is one of 112 cannabinoids, and it binds with different receptors than DELTA9. Basically, this is getting into the chemistry aspect, which I was never good at, which is why I'm in PR, but I'm back to chemistry now in this space. So it has one less hydrocarbon than DELTA9, but obviously it makes a very, very big difference, especially given all the questions I see coming in. There's so many questions about DELTA8. So it's important to note that DELTA8 THC is still an unpredictable compound, and not every manufacturer knows how to make it safely. I know that's, there's a lot of inconsistencies across the board. And not every lab can test it properly, which I'm sure Masha can speak to, because a lot of times they're using outdated methods, and it can generate all sorts of false results. And as we've talked about here, how you test is so critically important. So let's just dive right in. And then the other thing to flag is that DELTA8 THC was made legal by the 2018 Farm Bill, allowing for all derivatives and cannabinoids of hemp that were not DELTA9 THC. However, the DEA has made it illegal effective August 21st, 2020, with a 60-day comment period. So there is some controversy here, both on the legal side, and I know I'm getting it from clients as well too. So want to take a quick temperature read of the panel. Maybe we can go around for those that can speak to it. I know, Ricardo, you probably can't answer most of these, but you may get a couple of questions, but we understand if you can't answer all of them. But Dustin, Masha, Jay, there's a lot of controversy. What do you think? Should there be caps set? And does DELTA8 require more consumer education? What are your general thoughts? I don't know, Jay, if you want to start first.
Yeah, mute, Jay.
You're on mute. There you go.
Yeah. So as far as that goes, I mean, it's tough to say whether there should be caps or no caps. I think it's all just really, a preference. I mean, you see CBD now, it's like, you have, gummies and all that stuff, they cap off at 25 milligrams. Some are starting to do 50 in one gummy. Then you have the tinctures that go really high. Some are doing 10,000, in a bottle. I think really, this is different though. This is a lot different because, with CBD, you're just creating balance, you're not getting any psychoactive effects, but with DELTA8, it's a whole different ball game. Like 25 milligrams of DELTA8, it's going to be relaxing, great time. But the caps, that's a tough one. It's a tough one to actually weigh in on, say, because everybody has different tolerances, so yeah, that's a tough one.
Masha, I see you shaking your head. Do you want to give some perspective on the controversy?
Well, it's so DELTA8, and I actually was just talking to Dr. Rochelle Weiner before this Zoom so that I had it right exactly. What she was saying is that, so DELTA9 THC binds with the CB1 receptors. CBD binds with CB2 receptors. DELTA8 binds with CB1 and CB2, which is why it's not as intoxicating. So you're a little intoxicated, but you're not confused. So it's just, and it's balancing. So, my feeling is that THC, DELTA9 THC is just one cannabinoid that we seem to be obsessed with. It's going to become irrelevant eventually because there are so many more. So if we did this, if we literally there would be so much more innovation and for the health benefits of people if we could just let go of this obsession, because more research does need to happen. So just to kind of, I think that as long as it's legally less than 0.3% THC, which is what the guidelines are, less than 0.3%, Delta-9 THC, then I think that it should not be regulated, because there's a lot of benefits. For example, I have someone in my office who's going through chemo. He's a very young guy, and he says that the Delta-8, it just saves him. Like, it literally, like, it just is so beneficial for him. And then there was like another, my mom's friend, who's a little old lady, I gave it to her, and she said that she's been depressed her whole life, and the first time ever she actually felt some happiness. So those stories need to be told, so that we have the good stories, you know, the benefits, how it, you know, that are outweighing. And you know this, Duree, you know what happens in PR. You hear the negatives. Oh, it's banned in this state, it's bad here, it's bad, and then people start researching it, and then that's all they see is bad news, bad news, bad news. So it's the positive stories that we need to start telling. So I'm all for it.
Well, and you mentioned, I mean, on the PR side, we always want to tell the positive stories. As we know, though, the phrase "if it bleeds, it leads," you know, it's not always the positive stuff that's out there. We always like to work on that with our clients, and I wholeheartedly agree that telling these stories and the personal testimonials of the little old lady and the person going through chemo or any sort of treatment is so important. So that's why I love what we do in this space, because we're able to help tell those stories, and also it's an educational process. Right? You know, so everything we do is part of that educational process. And so I think, you know, that's why I love being in this space is I mean, when I first started, you know, well before the 2018 Farm Bill, you know, people didn't know. I mean, there was journalists didn't know. We spent years trying to educate journalists, and we continue to do that. But then as we have the, you know, Delta-8, as things continue to evolve, and there's other, you know, there's Delta-3, Delta-10, there's lots of other things coming, CBD, CBN, you know, it's an ongoing educational process. And I think for all of us on here, you know, from FDAX when he can to help educate the, you know, where he needs to, and Dustin with your clients calling going, is this legal? Is it not? You know, I think that's all what we're looking to do to, you know, Jay, when he's creating the different products and formulating his products to sell. I think that's all of what we, you know, what attracts us to what we do here in this space. And I think we have that opportunity, like panels like this, to continue to do that and to tell those stories. So I'm thankful that, you know, I get to do that and help tell those stories to ultimately help, you know, lift the, you know, the whole industry as a whole, because I agree with you, Masha. There are a lot of times when only the bad stories are out there, or the negative stories. And it's not just specific to cannabis. I mean, this is just how the world works. So we just have to work like 3, 4, 5 times harder to get the good stories out there and to really keep things, you know, keep things going. So Dustin, I want to turn to you. From a legal perspective, whose ruling do we follow? Is it the DEA, the Farm Bill? How are you advising clients? And I know we could probably spend 5 hours on this. So in a succinct version, what are you recommending to your clients at this point?
Yeah, well, first off, I will say that everyone, this might be self-fulfilling, but you really, if you're selling Delta-8, you should be working with an attorney to fully understand what you can and cannot do, and kind of to assess what your level of risk is. Some of the clients I work with have no tolerance for any risk, and they don't even want to sell CBD products because of some of the FDA issues, and they'll sell topicals, right? Because the FDA has certain regulations relating to selling CBD as a food or dietary supplement. So for those clients that have no risk tolerance, you know, stick to CBD topicals and definitely don't touch Delta-8. Other clients I have are willing to take a little bit more risk. They're willing to maybe sell CBD as a food, or maybe call it hemp extract, you know, whole hemp extract, as opposed to, you know, CBD, which we kind of structured and market it in a way that arguably is compliant with the FDA. So I think the first thing is really to assess your risk. But let me just kind of walk through, and I'm going to take a few minutes to kind of explain the legal analysis. And the first thing to understand is that it's not clear. But in the 2018 Farm Bill, what it did is it legalized hemp, all of its cannabinoids, isomers, and derivatives. So it's pretty clear from that if Delta-8 is naturally derived from the hemp plant, then it is, it's called hemp itself, actually. So even the derivatives, pursuant to the 2018 Farm Bill, the cannabinoids and the derivatives are themselves hemp as well. It's not just the hemp plant. even the derivatives and the cannabinoids within the hemp plants are also considered hemp. So if the Delta-8 is naturally derived, as long as whatever the product is less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC, it is legal. Now, even dealing with natural Delta-8, you then have some people talking about the Federal Analog Act. What the Federal Analog Act says is that if something acts the same as something that is a Schedule 1 substance, then that substance, even if it's not specifically listed as a Schedule 1 substance, is going to be treated as a Schedule 1 substance. So both Delta-9 and Delta-8 are on Schedule 1 as a Schedule 1 substance. So to the extent Delta-8 acts like Delta-9, there's an argument that the federal analog would come in. Now, in my opinion, number one, it does not act like Delta-9 because it's more of a body high as opposed to a head high. Plus, I think the 2018 Farm Bill, since it's an act of Congress, actually overrides that Federal Analog Act. So as long as it's derived from hemp, that natural Delta-8 should be legal. So there's already just the argument just with natural Delta-8. So then things get a little bit confusing because currently there are no products, as far as I know, that are naturally derived Delta-8 because that Delta-8 grows in such small quantities within the plant. So essentially these are being created, these Delta-8 products are being created through an isomerization process whereby they're taking CBD isolate that comes from hemp, and they are converting that CBD isolate to Delta-8. And so pursuant to the 2018 Farm Bill, remember, hemp and all of its derivatives are in and of themselves also considered hemp. So that CBD oil, if it's a derivative from the hemp plant, is hemp in and of itself. And the derivatives from that CBD oil, such as Delta-8, should be considered as hemp in and of themselves as well. Where this gets tricky is the DEA IFR basically called out that any synthetic THCs are illegal. They didn't specifically state Delta-8. They just basically said synthetic THCs are illegal, which, by the way, we already knew. And the reason why synthetic THCs are illegal is because of things like K2 and spice that were very popular back in the day. Those are completely made in the lab, K2 and spice. They're not derived from a plant. They are made in a lab. Those synthetic products have been illegal because they're synthetic THCs. But a lot of people are taking that language in the DEA IFR that says synthetic THCs, and they're basically saying, well, holy crap, the way we make Delta-8 is through a synthetic process. I mean, technically, I've talked to a lot of scientists. It's a synthesis. You're synthesizing the product into, and I'm not a chemist either. I'm not a big chemistry fan, but I had to learn enough about it to give proper legal guidance on it. And you are to some extent synthetically creating Delta-8. But guess what? When you make CBD, you're also synthetically creating CBD in some way. There's a synthesis process. So really you have to look at what did the DEA really mean when they said synthetic THC. And in my opinion, they're really referring to things like K2 and spice. If they really wanted to call out Delta-8, they had every opportunity within that DEA IFR to explicitly state that that Delta-8 derived from CBD is considered a synthetic THC, and therefore it's illegal. Now, even if the DEA IFR did say that, there's a question on whether the DEA actually even has the authority to say that, because the 2018 Farm Bill is an act of Congress, and the Congress quite clearly said that hemp and all of its derivatives, as long as they have less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC, are considered hemp in and of themselves. So, you have this kind of, several different issues that you got to deal with, but ultimately it's very important that you understand like kind of that legal, that was a very brief kind of explanation. I could talk about it for, another hour if we wanted to, but that's a very brief synopsis on where we're at. And as a result, to your question before about implementing, a cap on how much you could put, really at this point, what I'm pretty much pushing for, and I've had several talks with Holly and different people at FDAX, Ricardo, what I'm pushing for is just having Delta-8 regulated. I want it regulated. We should have regulations, because the way it stands right now, you could actually have a Delta-8 gummy, and in Florida, there's actually no age limit on gummies. If it's a hemp product, There's an age limit on inhalables. There's not an age limit on gummies. And quite honestly, a 12-year-old shouldn't be able to go into a gas station and buy a Delta-8 gummy. So we need to have regulations around Delta-8 on age requirements, labeling requirements. Perhaps we should have some regulations about how we have to disclose to consumers the amount of milligrams and the effect of it. So my clients that are selling Delta-8, we basically self-impose certain regulations. So several of my clients, we've imposed either 5, 10, or 25 milligram dosages. We also have self-imposed certain packaging requirements. We have certain inventory tracking requirements that we're putting in. There's various things you could do for the consumers, not to be compliant with the law, because right now the law isn't giving us any guidance whatsoever, but to help the consumers. So right now, with FDOC's not regulating, in my position, I know FDOC has their hands full. It's very challenging with the DEA, so I'm not pointing my finger at FDOC, but FDOC is the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and I just think we're doing a disservice to the consumers by not regulating Delta-8 and not talking about it and not figuring out how to properly, have it sold in a safe manner and make sure all the customers are educated on it. So I'll kind of stop there. I could talk about it for a while, but the long story short, it's complicated. There's a huge opportunity. Delta-8's a huge market right now. And really, it would be very helpful if we got a little bit more clarity from the DEA. And FDOC is doing the best they can, so I'm not pointing my finger there. They could really do only so much with the DEA remaining so quiet on what their position is on Delta-8.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. I think it's very helpful for all of us, including those that are in this space. It's always great to hear from a legal perspective as to what should be, what can we. One question I have is, are you advising your clients with Delta-8 products to disclose how the products are made? Is that something as part of the self-regulation that you're recommending, or have you not gone there yet? Does it matter? I'm just curious kind of what you're suggesting to your clients.
Well, we do put on the packaging certain language as far as just warnings, letting them know that there is some psychoactive effects. And honestly, if anyone looks at the back of an alcohol bottle, you'll see the disclaimer that they use for alcohol, that you should not operate any heavy machinery and anything like that. So I'm just self-imposing on my clients to put something like that on their labels, even though the law doesn't require it. And then in addition, at the end of the day, a lot of our clients, they just buy it from a white labeler. So they don't necessarily even know whether it's naturally or synthetically. But what I'm encouraging them to do is to put in inventory tracking systems so that they could at least confirm that Delta-8 is indeed derived from hemp, right? Because Delta-8 derived from marijuana is illegal. Even if the final product tests below 0.3% Delta-9 THC, it is illegal because it's derived from marijuana. So being able to track back to the fact that it did indeed come from the hemp plant, and then it came from the CBD oil from that hemp plant, and then that CBD oil is what created that Delta-8 is very, very important. But you have the same issue with that for CBD. I mean, people don't realize CBD isolate derived from marijuana is illegal as well. So realistically, the law just hasn't really caught up with what the law is. I mean, really, the only way to prove that CBD isolate is not marijuana is to be able to track it back and prove that it came from hemp. So no, there's not anything, specifically where we're disclosing that to the customer as far as whether it's synthetic or naturally. Quite honestly, they're all synthetic. But the other last thing I'll note is, a vast majority of these products that are saying they are Delta-8, they are testing hot with FDACs for as far as Delta-9 THC. So it's very hard to kind of separate, back to what Masha was saying with the testing. It's very hard to kind of differentiate. And so, from what FDACs is telling me, that they are pulling products off the shelf, and a lot of them are testing hot.
Yeah, and we have a question for Masha about that. So I think this is a good segue into it. So the question is, are the bigger issues with Delta-8 related to adulterated formulations? Can Masha talk about the new testing protocols that can better help identify the full panel of all ingredients in a product? And
So we developed a test, we call it the potency 12. And so without getting too technical, and sorry, that's my puppy. I'm not a chemist either, so I'm learning everything. The way it's tested is with liquid chromatography. And what that does is liquid chromatography, it separates cannabinoids to analyze different peaks. And so in a lab, when you're running a machine, it takes a certain amount of time. And the computer, the machines are calibrated in a certain way, and then it reads a software, and then it spits out the report, which is the COA, the certificate of analysis. And so what I asked for the lab to do, and I don't know if you guys can see this, it could be a little hard to see, but I'm just going to put it on my camera. Kelly, can you see this if I put it up really close, like right there, where the peaks are? It's a little tough to see, but if you let the machine run long enough, then it starts to separate the peaks. So you can see where the DELTA8 is and where the DELTA9 is. But because we're all learning and because we're all in a hurry and overworked and everybody wants their results yesterday, right? We run the machines at a shorter time. And so that's a very simplified reason as to how the Delta, and this is again, if I'm just put it up to the camera, if you can see this, many times the DELTA9 peak, it's read inside the DELTA8 peak. And so it's going to test for DELTA9. Every time it'll test hot because they haven't tested it for long enough. So we also went a little bit further. We developed a test for DELTA10, and even though there's still, it's a very trace amount of it, but once you let the chromatogram run for a certain amount of time, then you can start to see the 3 peaks out of DELTA8, DELTA9, DELTA10. Everybody wants their potency tests like 2-day turnaround, 3-day turnaround, what's your turnaround? And so, so there's always like this, conundrum of, look, it could either be fast or it could be right. So, and we always err on the side of caution. If we have to retest, we'll retest, but that's what happens oftentimes. And so if the laboratories aren't sophisticated enough, this is very expensive equipment. If their equipment isn't up to date, we have 19 of these machines, right? And if you're a smaller lab, you have 2 or 3 because that's all you can afford because you're starting out, so these are the different things that we have to consider when looking for a laboratory. So we're very blessed because we've been doing this for a long time. And, we were in toxicology before we got into, so we're a clinical laboratory operating in the cannabis space. So there's a lot of learnings. There's a lot of, like we will train Shimatsu sometimes on how to use their instruments because on some of the things that we've developed. So the first thing is the testing. It's very important that we ask how these are tested and how, and if it's using liquid chromatography, it's called an HPLC. The other thing that is very important, and I interview people from all over the country for our blogs, and we interviewed someone out of Florida who has been, DELTA8 is not new. It's been around since the 70s, right? So this is not, nothing is really new, right? There's very little original thought going on here. But with hemp, of course, it's, it's new for us. So he has 20 different methods for synthesizing DELTA8. And, I was like, wow, like it's very interesting what Dustin was saying, how it is synthetically derived from CBD, but there's solvents, right, that have to, like, he can use different solvents, vitamin C derivatives and other solvents. There's clay. There's this one solvent called HU133, which sometimes tests like DELTA9. So if someone is not testing for residual solvents, right? So we have a lot of novices in the industry. And again, most people are so focused only on potency. They just want to make sure that number is below 0.3% THC. But let's not forget that this is a chemical. It's it's altered, and there's going to be solvents in there, and sometimes those solvents could be dangerous. And so it's really important to have the residual solvent test. You know, when we say full panel test, what that means is potency, residual solvents, pesticides, heavy metals, mycotoxins. It's a whole array of things that are tested for. And unfortunately, full panel testing is not, it's not really enforced. You know, the big focus right now is on potency. And this is another example of how the industry should regulate itself, is they should just do the full panel testing. The same way we should have warnings and on the labels and age limitations and all of that. So if the industry can police itself, and if there are good players that all work together, then we have a much stronger case for why these products can continue to be safely made and put into the market. And that's, again, all about education. So I'm always looking for new people to speak with, new extractors, different ways to present the information, and really, you know, regurgitate it in like very simple slices. You know, like if it sixth grader can understand it, then I'm happy. And it's complicated. I mean, it is very complicated. So, and it's, but you know, safety is really the most important thing, because this is so new. We don't know, there are no long-term studies for how these solvents affect us. And on that note, I'm super excited. We are going to be working, you know, we just submitted DELTA8 for a study with It was Green Road's DELTA8 isolate. So that's, I don't know if the study is going to be approved. I can't really talk any more about it, but this is going to be, I got permission to mention that, but it's really, you know, it's the first study. So I'm not, you know, we don't want to get too excited, but it's going to set a precedent. So, and that's really what it's going to take.
That overall helps the industry, and, you know, investing the time and the research and the dollars help all of us. Like you said earlier, all of us working together, you know, we're greater together in that whole push to help educate and to get more research, because like you said, we don't know enough about it. So that's exciting news that you're sharing with us today. So we'll have to see what happens, and fingers and toes crossed that can proceed and we get some much needed information. I want to just shift to Jay right now on the product side, right? Because you know, you create these products with your Pure Craft CBD. I'm just curious, in terms of product offerings, you know, what are your thoughts? I mean, obviously DELTA8 is the hot thing now. All of the folks that I know that have DELTA8 products say that, you know, they're flying off the shelves, or we can't keep it in stock. I'm just curious your perspective, you know, with a brand of, you know, what does that look like from your end at this point?
I mean, DELTA8's huge. It's a new thing, and, you know, it's become very popular very quick. And it's now just, you know, whether or not people can sell it or not, that's the big mystery. I think that's why we're, you know, a lot of us are all here today. A lot of people are tuning in. It's because they want to know whether or not they can do this and not get in trouble. So, and, you know, back to like Mosh, you know, it's really the future, and the real truth of this plan is combining all these different cannabinoids together to really get an all-around effect of just one type of thing. So like you can combine different cannabinoids and, you know, get different effects, you know, so it's combining this much of one and this much of the other and putting them together and getting that, you know, that result that you can put into a product. And I mean, not clearly stated what it can do, but, you know, you can push towards, it could help with something like this. And, you know, I think DELTA8 is definitely not going anywhere. It's going to be just like cannabis, you know, like when, you know, I first started, it was, you know, people like me that, you know, had to, you know, lead that path and pave it, you know, and we had to go through a lot of, you know, a lot of stuff, you know, to make the industry what it is. And it's going to be the same thing now. I mean, you can't expect that people are not going to get into trouble with this, because they are. People are going to get in trouble. And if it becomes too crazy with not enough regulation, you know, the DEA will make an example out of numerous groups of people to tame the public, you know, tame people from getting into something there where they see, you know, hey, we can get rich on this. You know, a lot of people think that they come into the cannabis space and they're going to just make a ton of money. And the truth is, this is like any other business, except it's 100 times harder because of the regulation, you know, and it takes a abundant amount of knowledge and money to really advance forward, you know, in this industry. So, but I think, you know, Delta8 it's definitely here to stay, and it's going to continue to progress. And once, you know, we figure it out and, you know, they figure it out on their end, which could be, I mean, we know how they work. It could be years on end, you know, but yeah, it's definitely here to stay for sure.
Well, thank you for that. And I don't know, Ricardo, is there anything that you can add or want to add to this? I'm not sure. I know we have tons of questions to get to, lots and lots of questions. I don't know if there's anything that you want or need to add. If not, we can continue to go into the Q&As that I'm seeing pop up here.
Sure. I mean, again, for Delta8, you know, all hemp products must test, you know, to total T8, you know, total Delta9 THC 0.3, and that's where we're at right now. You know, so that's all. Sorry,
Okay. No,
not much else. Yeah.
I think I'd also like to tune in with something that's also I've seen that's becoming an issue, and that's with processing. Now, a lot of people are going to have problems with processing, you know, almost just like Ricardo had said with the 0.3%. Now you're seeing a lot of things now where it's, you know, like Masha had said, you have the similarities in the Delta8 and the Delta9, right? Now, just because Delta8 is THC and Delta9 is also THC, even though there's different, you know, amounts of carbons in there that affect the result and how they bond to receptors, there still is a big problem with processing, you know, payments and all that stuff through online sales because they're still seeing Delta8 as a THC. And I think this is another problem too that needs to be addressed. You know, as far as like you have your Delta9, which is your 0.3% period, no matter what. You know, if you have over that, you fail, you can't sell it. Okay. And then you have the Delta8, which is obviously testing way higher than that, but processing and banks are still skeptical and they're not allowing it to really, they're not willing to take the risk on it, you know? So I think that's also a big problem too, you know, that a lot of people are going to face, you know?
I actually just spoke to, because I'm always like, you know, looking for, because my clients are always asking us about payments, merchant processors. So I'm kind of, you know, always vetting different ones. And I spoke to 3 recently that said, if it was an existing client that was adding Delta8 to their product line, they were going to keep working with them. But if it was any new clients that was just Delta8, they were not onboarding any new Delta8 clients. And I just keep hearing that over and over again. So I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means that the market now that creates a barrier to entry where the people who are already in, you know, party for them, or if it's just going to cause, you know, other sort of underground stuff. But it's a great point. It's a great point.
And to that point as well, I think some of the questions relate to the recent vape ban, and I'm sure we'll get to those questions. But even for the private shippers that are now willing to take on shipping these hemp products under this vape ban, a lot of them are staying away from Delta8 as well. So we still are living in this world where, although, you know, even if banks that are on board for hemp or shippers that are on board for hemp, they're kind of carving out this Delta8 situation and saying that they don't feel comfortable shipping it. So it's you know, you're kind of you have a whole new set of challenges if you're selling Delta8.
It's like as the world turns, right? It continues to be an opportunity and a challenge almost at the same time. So Rafael Alvarez, he's asked a bunch of questions about Delta8 and vape cartridges. In particular, how are they being shipped right now? We know that that is a serious situation. And can he mail, can I ship Delta8 vape cartridges by mail in the state of Florida? So I don't know if Dustin, you want to answer. I know Masha, we've talked about this in depth as well too. I don't know if one of you wants to jump in, or I don't even know if Ricardo can weigh in as well too. So I'll turn it over to one of you.
Yeah, the vape thing is really causing a lot of chaos for a lot of my clients. So it's been a huge pain. Everyone's trying to figure it out. USPS basically has said that they're not going to be shipping vapes. FedEx and UPS has said they're going to follow suit. You do have private shippers. There's just additional requirements now as far as age verification, signatures, registering. They're just making it very much difficult to ship vape products. But as long as if it's not Delta8, there's several private shippers that you could ship through. When you're dealing with Delta8, it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more niche. You're gonna have to really work hard and make sure you're finding the right shippers to partner up with that are comfortable with taking on that risk, and perhaps making these shippers feel comfortable by offering them some sort of indemnification or release of liability or something like that in the instance that they get pulled over and they get in trouble, right? Because that's what they're concerned about. And so if you're a Delta8 seller and you say, hey, well, shipper, why are you not willing to take this risk? Well, as the customer, why don't you just say, hey, we'll shift that risk. We'll give you, we'll put in indemnification provisions. If you get pulled over, if you get in trouble, if anything were to happen, we'll indemnify you for any court costs, any damages, any, damages that you incur. So it's very complicated. The vape ban is cost several of my e-commerce Delta8 clients a lot of money. And so it's tricky and it is happening in real time. So we're just trying to figure it out as it happens. I mean, it just as of like just a week or two ago, USPS said that they're not going to be shipping those products. So everyone's kind of scrambling right now to figure it out. And I also just want to say,
too.
yeah, there's also a distinction between if you're shipping to a consumer versus if you're going business to business as well.
Yeah, we just did a blog. I just did a blog on this. So it's April 5th was when UPS stopped shipping. And then I think FedEx is going to follow whatever the US Post Office. US Post Office is, I don't think they've made a decision, but I don't think they're shipping, but there's no like formal, and then DHL, now I'm not sure, but they do have to register with the Attorney General, right? So we have a link on the blog. I posted it in the chat if you want to share it with everyone else. We have a link there for how to register. But B2B, right? So it's a little different with B2B. So wholesalers, they're going to be using freight. Like the big guys, they're going to be sending their stuff to the stores. So we see this as like a way to drive traffic back to the stores. Now, how will that affect e-commerce? That's going to have a big effect on e-commerce. I mean, people they're sending us messages like, can we ship samples? Like, are you going to accept packages? Are you going to accept samples from the US Post Office to the lab? And I was like, oh, that's an interesting question. But, people are confused, like, yeah, we still accept samples, send us samples. We're not the register. Like, we're not the end consumer. But I think it's going to cause a lot of confusion. And I do think that, again, the big guys, the wholesalers, they'll, use freight to get stuff to the stores, and then, and it's going to be signature for delivery too, right? Like it's private shipper, signature for delivery, and all of that. So yeah.
One of the questions we have in the chat is what makes a bulk order, I guess? Like, what is there a X number of what, I mean, do we know what constitutes a bulk order in order to ship nationwide? Somebody's is asking that. I don't know what that is. I don't know if anybody on the panel knows offhand what would be considered a bulk order. No. Okay. Sorry, Raphael, we're not sure on that. Another question Raphael had as well, which is, are the police trained on a Florida local level about Delta8? And I know, Dustin, you've done some training before. I don't know if you did any as part of Delta8, but even just for hemp,
Yeah.
that is this, just overall, I know it's been a problem on the PR side because, one of the challenges is if law enforcement doesn't know what's going on, and it's been in the news over the last several years, you see people where they think it's a marijuana bust, but it's hemp. And, oftentimes that happens and it's a bust and it's all over the news. And from a PR crisis perspective, it's tough because we can't undo that. The press is already out there. And so I do think and I know that you've done some law enforcement, I don't say training, but maybe it's more education. So I don't know if you can weigh in on that, because I know you've worked in that a lot, especially with
I mean, it's certainly the law enforcement is not educated on Delta-8 because they're barely even educated on hemp. Really. I mean, as Duree pointed out, we had a client, and Duree was involved in this a little bit. We got her in the loop, but we had a client where the Miami-Dade Police Department was at his farm, and they thought he was essentially growing illegal marijuana. And, we invited them in, and I actually went over there the day after, and we turned it into an educational opportunity. Like the next day, they brought in like a bunch of other members of the police department. We kind of explained the laws to them. I'm also on the Broward County Medical Marijuana Advisory Board, and we've gone out and educated various different municipal police departments on the difference between hemp and marijuana. So, we're still working just on giving them the distinction, and even customs. I get a lot of calls on import export of hemp products, and customs isn't familiar. They don't have a way to distinguish between hemp and marijuana. So it's kind of a crapshoot, even trying to import hemp into the country. So as far as Delta-8, certainly law enforcement, customs, airports, they're certainly not educated on it. And it's going to take some time.
Certainly on the Delta-8, when we have overall for hemp gotten it. And Ricardo, I don't know if you can add anything or want to.
Yeah, I could add to that state of Florida is one of the few states that has an agricultural law enforcement. So we have our own ag police, and something we've been doing since the beginning of our program has been to do outreach and to do education and awareness with our ag police to city and council, county police, to inform them and educate them, train them on what's the difference between medical marijuana and hemp. And we do provide a resource. We do provide ourselves as a resource to advocate on behalf of hemp, of the industry, and making sure that if there is a seizure of some sort, and it wasn't, and everything is there and the person can prove it's hemp, then we're happy to step in on that one and prevent loss. Unfortunately, it is a very ongoing it's ongoing. It's something that really takes time still.
Well, there's no doubt. There's no, and I know, Dustin, you even mentioned to me once that you've had clients that get, and even consumers, something could be mailed to them, hemp or CBD, and they get a note saying, come pick it up. I mean, it was interesting when you mentioned that to me. I don't know if you want to speak to that for a second, but I was just fascinated as a consumer, some of the stuff that's going on. We just have, and forget about Delta-8, just on, CBD and the hemp side, there are still so much confusion. You throw Delta-8 in and it's really crazy.
Yeah, if you ever get a letter from the Postal Service saying that, they want you to come in to pick up your package because they're questioning it, you may want to call an attorney and make sure that you know what to do. And yeah, that's unfortunately happened to several of my clients. And, we get it resolved, and, things turn out to be fine. But I wouldn't recommend just going in and kind of arguing about it without some sort of legal counsel with you.
I think that was very good information when you told me that. I think a week or two ago, I thought, we need to make sure that others know that as well too, because, there's still a lot of misunderstanding, and, that goes to law enforcement, and then you have to throw Delta-8 in there, and it's really, it's really confusing. So I do have another question here, and this is from Mark. It's kind of long. I'm going to read it. Dustin, this might be to you. With respect to Delta-8 THC, A, have any U.S. trademarks been registered or approved for registration for goods containing this compound, or is the USPTO still refusing to register such marks under FDCA and or CSA?
Okay, so so he has 3 questions there. I'm going to answer them in the opposite way he asked them. So he asked, is there a gold standard for labeling? I would say number one, just for hemp in general, I think Florida's labeling laws are pretty much the gold standard. Previous to Florida coming out with their labeling rules, I would tell clients to follow Indiana because they were kind of the gold standard. So just from a general perspective, right now I adopt Florida, and that's not completely consistent with all other states, but for the most part you'll have 98% of it covered. With respect to Delta-8, there really aren't any laws on the labels of what you should put on it, so those are just self-imposed things that I've created for my clients to cover them more from a civil perspective, not because a state is requiring it, but if someone were to get in a car accident because they consumed Delta-8, they didn't know that it was intoxicating, you want to make sure your bottles have the warnings on them, and you could say, hey, I educated you, I let you know. So it's more from a civil perspective, some of the stuff you want on the labeling and the marketing. Then the second question you have is, what's the FDA's position on Delta-8? And I love that question because too often in the cannabis industry, we forget that the FDA even exists. So from a Delta-8 perspective, regardless of my analysis relating to the 2018 Farm Bill and the DEA, the 2018 Farm Bill specifically preserved the FDA's authority to regulate hemp as a food or dietary supplement or as a drug. And I'm not an FDA attorney. That's why I brought on board Edgar Aspie, who is with my firm now, who has 2 decades of FDA experience, because the future of cannabis is treating it like any other food, dietary supplement or drug. As we get national legalization, federal legalization, whether it's hemp or marijuana, you're going to need to fall into one of these different categories, and really it's the FDA that controls that. And so regardless of my analysis before with whether it's criminal, you still need to comply with FDA law. And so with Delta-8, you don't have the drug exclusion rule, which basically is what makes CBD in a food or dietary supplement is illegal because of the drug exclusion rule. There's Epidiolex. So when you have a FDA approved drug like that uses an ingredient, you can also have a food or dietary supplement that's using that ingredient. Delta-8 doesn't have that issue with the FDA. However, if you're using an ingredient in any product, it needs to go through pre-market approval through the FDA. And so if you're using it in a food, it needs to be grass, which is generally recognized as safe, which Delta-8 is not grass right now, or it needs to be an NDI, a new dietary ingredient, which, as far as I know, no one I know has gone through the pre-market approval to get Delta-8 approved as an NDI. So really, it's important for people to understand, even if you get past all those DEA and 2018 Farm Bill hurdles, still, I would say a very large percentage of the Delta-8 product out there, if not all of it, is still not compliant from an FDA perspective. And then that leads me to his first question, which is whether there's been any trademarks issued. And my best guess, I don't know for certain, but I haven't seen any Delta-8 trademarks, because right now the USPTO is denying any trademarks for CBD and food or dietary supplement because of what I just said with the FDA. And I would imagine that the USPTO would do the same thing with Delta-8. You don't have the drug exclusion issue that usually the USPTO highlights when they're dealing with the CBD trademark, but I imagine you will get some issues from them relating to other, the NDI and the grass issues as it relates to them. So, there's a lot of issues relating to Delta-8, but generally, I think it'd be interesting. I'd probably, maybe I should do a search and see if anyone has gotten, but I would be very surprised if there's been any Delta-8 trademarks on that.
I want to tell you something funny. So I go into the vape shops all the time just to kind of check out what products they're selling. And there's a vape shop in Boca. It's like a super nice vape shop. They have a little jar, and there was flour in there, and it says Delta-8. And I said to the girl, I was like, Delta-8? I'm like, how is this Delta-8 flour? And she said, oh yeah. She's like, it's genetically modified seed. It's grown really special. It's totally safe, and it's approved by the FDA. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, this is the stuff that's out there, right? So like, there is no Delta-8 flour. So like, if anybody says there is, it's sprayed, and it's not approved by the FDA. So there's so that's dangerous. When you have people like that are working in these vape shops, and they're the gatekeepers. That's the part that I think if we're going to start anywhere, yeah, we've got to educate law enforcement on the COAs, the bankers, and all of that. But it's the people in the vape shops. Like, they're the ones that are actually, eventually the consumers will get sick, and then it'll go back to that. And then, you know, that's the way it'll trickle down and become bad news. So
Yeah, well, they're almost like the front line, you know,
Right.
they're the foot
they're the
soldiers.
front line. Yeah.
They're the front
Yep.
line for questions. So
Yep.
thank you for that. Jen Rath asked, can you label Delta-8 infused supplement products as organic, or is there a regulation preventing the use of organic in ingredient labels similar to California cannabis regulations? Does anybody want to take that?
So there's nothing specific to Delta8 relating to organic, but I mean, you know, to be certified organic, there are certain specific regulations you need to comply with. And my best guess is that there's probably not many Delta8 products that would be able to satisfy the requirements to being certified organic. So that's my only thought on that.
Okay, great. I don't know, Ricardo, is there anything from your end to add to anything that we've just chatted about?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
And I think we're good on the questions. There's one more from Jeff. Is it possible that Delta-8 is popular because access to Delta-9 and full spectrum cannabis is so restricted? If cannabis could be purchased and distributed across state lines as freely and without regulation taxes as Delta-8, do you feel that the market for Delta-8 would be anywhere as strong as it is now? I think that's hard to.
For sure. No, I mean, there's no doubt that Delta8 is, people like that as an alternative because you don't need to go through all the hoops that you need to go through with Delta-9 THC. So there's no doubt that the restrictiveness of Delta-9 makes Delta8 more appealing. But I will tell you, as a personal consumer of Delta-8, I actually prefer Delta-8 over Delta-9, which is weird for me to say because like I didn't, you know, I'm not one to like get like caught up on the hype. Like I'm not really, I don't feel anything really with CBD, and I'm always very skeptical. But honestly, from just a feeling perspective, it's not as much of a head high, it's a body high. So you're really able to be much more clear-headed on Delta8. You don't have as much, as far as my personal experience with it, you don't have like any sort of like anxiety or paranoia, some of the other stuff. So, you know, I think Delta8 is a good product, but there's no doubt that its popularity probably wouldn't be as big if, you know, Delta-9 wasn't so highly restricted. And I would also say the same thing for CBD. You know, if Delta-9 was available the same way that CBD is available, I don't necessarily think CBD would be nearly, I don't think as many farmers would be growing low THC cannabis called hemp if they were allowed to grow high THC cannabis called marijuana. They're just growing hemp because, you know, it's an easier license to get, and that's what they're allowed to do.
The other thing about Delta8 is it's like the perfect use case, I think, is like when you're traveling. It's the perfect thing when you're traveling because you're not confused. So you like, don't go the wrong way. You don't miss your flight. You don't miss your stuff. But you're like, if you're delayed and there's like all the weirdness of the Corona travel, you're kind of relaxed about it. Like you're good. It just helps with this anxiety. And I think use cases are very interesting in educating people. You know, here's some Delta8. It's a perfect 4-hour flight. Goodbye. You know, like, and maybe that's how we should be thinking about it and a little more specific.
Perfect. Well, I know we had a few people that had written in and asked for contact info. So I don't know if the panelists want to go ahead and put their email or contact info in the chat, just in case anybody wants to reach out. Look, Jay, looks like somebody reached out, wants to talk to you from Dubai. So we'll get you that information. And I'm going to drop my info in there as well now. So unless there's anything else to add, I know we've gone on more than our hour. It's a fascinating, you know, definitely a lot of fascinating conversations here, and no doubt they will continue. So it'll be fun, I think, to take a look back in a year from now to see kind of where we're at. Maybe we need to mark our calendars for a year from now to take that look back and see, you know, how far we've come in that year. And I just want to thank everybody for participating. I know it's a big time commitment, and I so appreciate Jay, Masha, Dustin, Ricardo, and everybody at C-Lab who makes this all happen. And as things get back to normal, I'm looking forward to seeing so many people in person as well. And thank you all so much for participating.
Awesome.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you for
Thank
putting
you,
it
Duree.
together. Thank you.
So much.
Always good to
Bye.
see everybody. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.